Not heavier, not lighter, just different, like it carried the weight of every doubt, every whispered comment, every role that she'd endured over the past 18 months of training. Sarah Chun had spent countless hours on the range, perfecting her aim while others perfected their skepticism. She was just the target changer, they said, the girl who swapped out the paper silhouettes while the real shooters took their breaks. But now, with Master Chief Rodriguez's own rifle cradled against her shoulder and 200 yards of California desert stretching between her and a target most seasoned SEALs struggle to hit, everything hung in the balance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the range, and somewhere behind her, she could hear the quiet murmur of voices, some curious, some doubtful, all waiting. Rodriguez had done something unprecedented. In 23 years of service, he had never handed his rifle to anyone outside his immediate team. The weapon was an extension of himself, custom-fitted and precisely calibrated. Yet here he stood, arms crossed, watching as the young woman who'd been dismissed as just support staff prepared to take a shot that could change everything. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant sound of waves crashing against the Coronado shore. Sarah's breathing steadied. Her finger found the trigger, and in that moment, she wasn't thinking about proving anyone wrong or making history. She was simply doing what she'd been born to do. This is her story. Sarah Chun arrived at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado on a Tuesday morning in March, clutching her transfer orders and trying not to let the Pacific breeze mess up the hair she'd spent 20 minutes perfecting. The base sprawled along the silver shoreline like a small city, its buildings painted in military beige and green, its roads lined with palm trees that seemed almost too cheerful for such a serious place. She was 23 years old, a petty officer second class with a spotless record and a secret that would have surprised anyone who bothered to look closely at her personnel file. Growing up in rural Montana, Sarah had learned to shoot before she learned to ride a bike. Her father, a former Marine turned hunting guide, had taught her that precision wasn't just about steadiness. It was about patience, breathing, and understanding the weapon as an extension of yourself. But none of that mattered here. She was assigned to range operations, which meant she would be changing targets, cleaning equipment, and managing the ammunition inventory while the real warriors honed their deadly skills. It wasn't what she'd hoped for when she'd enlisted, but it was a foot in the door of the most elite training facility in the world. Her supervisor was Chief Petty Officer Mike Harrison, a weathered man in his 40s who looked like he'd been carved from the same granite as Mount Rushmore. He had kind eyes, but a no-nonsense demeanor that had been shaped by 2 decades of military service. On her first day, he walked her through the facility with the efficiency of someone who'd given this tour hundreds of times. The range complex was impressive. Multiple shooting lanes stretched out toward distant targets, with sophisticated electronic scoring systems and wind measurement equipment. The weapons storage area housed an arsenal that would make most small countries envious. Everything was clean, organized, and maintained to military perfection. Your job is simple, Harrison explained as they walked past a group of trainees setting up for morning practice. Keep the ranges running smoothly. Change targets when they're shot up. Clean weapons when they come back dirty. Inventory ammunition. Help with equipment maintenance. Think of yourself as the oil that keeps this machine running. Sarah nodded, though something inside her bristled at being described as just a support function. She watched the trainees preparing their rifles, noting the practiced way they checked their equipment and settled into firing positions. These were good shooters, she could tell, but she'd grown up around guns and had an eye for technique. Her first few weeks passed quietly. She learned the rhythm of the range, the personalities of the instructors, and the unspoken hierarchy that governed everything. The SEAL candidates treated her with distant politeness, the kind of courtesy extended to someone who was present, but not really part of the mission. She was furniture that happened to wear a uniform. Master Chief Antonio Rodriguez was different from the other instructors. While most of them were career Navy, Rodriguez had come up through the ranks and earned his position through a combination of skill, determination, and an almost supernatural ability with a rifle. He was in his early 40s, compact and powerful, with graying hair at his temples and eyes that seemed to take in everything. More importantly, he actually acknowledged Sarah's existence. "Morning, Chun," he would say when he arrived for his sessions. While others simply handed her their weapons for cleaning without a word, Rodriguez would ask about her day or comment on the weather. Small gestures, but they meant something in a place where she often felt invisible. The range had several different courses of fire, from close-quarters combat scenarios to long-distance precision shooting. Sarah's favorite was the 600-yard range, where the most advanced shooters practiced extreme long-distance marksmanship. She would sit in the control tower, monitoring wind conditions and updating target information, watching through high-powered spotting scopes as bullets traveled across the California landscape. During her 6th week, while changing targets on the 300-yard range, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. One of the advanced trainees, a cocky young officer named Lieutenant Brad Morrison, was consistently shooting low and to the left. His groupings were tight, which meant his technique was solid, but his point of impact was off. Sarah had seen this pattern before. It usually meant the rifle's scope needed a minor adjustment, something that could be corrected with a few clicks of the elevation and windage dials. She debated whether to say anything. Morrison had made it clear that he didn't appreciate input from support personnel, especially female support personnel. 2 weeks earlier, when she'd handed him a freshly cleaned rifle, he made a comment about girls playing with toys they don't understand that had made her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. But watching him waste ammunition on a problem that could be fixed in 30 seconds was painful. Finally, as Morrison packed up his gear with obvious frustration, Sarah approached him. "Excuse me, Lieutenant," she said carefully. "I noticed your grouping was consistently low left today. Might want to check your scope adjustments." Morrison stopped packing and turned to look at her with an expression of incredulous amusement. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Your shots were hitting about 4 inches low and 2 inches left of your point of aim," Sarah continued, keeping her voice steady despite the dismissive look on his face. "Your grouping was tight, so your fundamentals are solid. Probably just need a couple clicks up and right on your scope." Morrison glanced around to see if anyone else was witnessing this interaction. A few other trainees had stopped what they were doing to listen, and Sarah could see the mixture of curiosity and secondhand embarrassment on their faces. "Let me get this straight," Morrison said, his voice carrying just loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think you know more about my rifle than I do? You think you can spot problems that I can't?" He laughed, but there was an edge to it that made Sarah's stomach clench. "That's rich. Really rich." Sarah felt heat creep up her neck, but she'd gone too far to back down now. "I'm just saying what I observed. The pattern was consistent across 15 rounds. Could save you some ammunition tomorrow." Morrison stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the small scar above his left eyebrow. "Listen, sweetheart," he said in a voice that dripped condescension. "I've been shooting since before you knew which end of a gun was which. I don't need marksmanship advice from someone whose job is to sweep brass and change paper targets." The words hit harder than Sarah had expected. She felt her face burning and was grateful that her Asian features didn't show blushing as obviously as some people's. Around them, the other trainees were pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. "I understand, sir," she managed to say. "I was just trying to help." Morrison shouldered his rifle case and headed toward the parking area, calling back over his shoulder. "Next time, stick to what you know. Leave the shooting to the shooters." Sarah stood there for a moment, feeling the curious gazes of the other trainees. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground, and never have to face any of these people again. Instead, she walked back to the control tower and busied herself with updating the range log, trying to ignore the whispered conversations that followed Morrison's departure. What she didn't notice was Master Chief Rodriguez standing in the doorway of the equipment shed, having witnessed the entire exchange. He'd been watching Morrison shooting too, and he'd reached the same conclusion about the scope adjustment. More interesting to him was the fact that Chun had spotted the problem and had the courage to mention it, despite the obvious risks. Rodriguez had been doing this job for more than 20 years, and he'd learned to recognize talent in unexpected places. He'd also learned that the best shooters weren't always the ones who talked the loudest or demanded the most attention. Sometimes they were the quiet ones who paid attention to details and cared more about accuracy than ego. That evening, after the range had cleared out and Sarah was finishing her equipment checks, Rodriguez approached her workstation. Tough day? He asked casually, leaning against the counter. Sarah looked up from the cleaning rod she was inspecting. Nothing I can't handle, Master Chief. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Morrison's a decent shot, but he's got some things to learn about humility. And about listening. He paused, studying her face. You were right about his scope, by the way. I checked it after he left. 2 clicks up, 1 click right. Textbook correction. Sarah felt a small surge of validation, but she kept her expression neutral. Thank you, Master Chief. Where'd you learn to spot that kind of problem? Rodriguez asked. My dad taught me to shoot when I was young, Sarah replied. We did a lot of hunting and competitive shooting back home in Montana. He always said that understanding your equipment was as important as understanding yourself. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Competitive shooting? What kind? Started with local matches when I was 12. Moved up to state competitions in high school. Did some college-level precision rifle before I enlisted. This was news to Rodriguez. He made a mental note to look at Chin's personnel file more carefully. Ever shot long distance? Beyond 300 yards. Up to 800 yards in competition, Sarah said. Longest hunting shot was about 650 yards on an elk. Dad always said if you can't make the shot clean, you don't take the shot at all. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. In his experience, people who claimed to be good shots usually weren't, and people who were actually good shots usually didn't need to talk about it. But there was something in Chin's quiet confidence that intrigued him. She wasn't bragging or trying to impress him. She was simply answering his questions honestly. Tell you what, Rodriguez said finally. Tomorrow morning, before the regular training starts, come out to the 600-yard range. Bring your eye protection and hearing protection. I want to see something. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Master Chief, just be there at 0630. And Chun. He turned to leave, then stopped. Don't mention this to anyone else. Not yet. As Rodriguez walked away, Sarah stood in the empty equipment room, wondering what she'd just gotten herself into. Part of her was excited. Finally, someone was giving her a chance to show what she could do. But another part of her was terrified. What if she couldn't perform under pressure? What if Morrison had been right, and she was just fooling herself about her abilities? That night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, running through everything her father had taught her about shooting. Breathing, sight picture, trigger control, follow through. The fundamentals never changed, regardless of the circumstances. But tomorrow morning, everything would be different. Tomorrow morning, she would find out if she really belonged here, or if she was just a target changer who happened to have opinions about scopes. The California moon shone through her window as Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with distant targets and the weight of a rifle in her hands. In a few hours, she would discover that sometimes the most important shots are the ones that happen when nobody's watching. Sometimes the real test isn't about hitting the target. Sometimes it's about having the courage to pick up the rifle in the first place. Sarah woke up 15 minutes before her alarm, her body automatically adjusting to the unusual schedule. The base was still quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, with only the distant sound of waves and the occasional vehicle passing on the coastal highway. She dressed carefully in her utilities, double-checking that her gear was properly squared away. Whatever Rodriguez had planned, she wanted to be ready for it. The walk to the 600-yard range took her past the main training areas, all empty and waiting for the day's activities. Security lights cast long shadows between the buildings, and the morning air carried the salt tang of the ocean mixed with the earthy smell of the desert vegetation that grew beyond the base perimeter. Sarah's boots crunched softly on the gravel path as she made her way toward what might be the most important morning of her military career. Rodriguez was already there when she arrived, silhouetted against the brightening eastern sky. He had set up a shooting position on the firing line with a bipod-mounted rifle and a spotting scope on a tripod beside it. The targets, barely visible in the growing light, seemed impossibly far away. "Good morning, Chun," Rodriguez said without turning around. "Right on time." "Good morning, Master Chief," Sarah replied, settling her gear bag on the ground beside the firing position. "What exactly are we doing here?" Rodriguez finally turned to face her, and in the better light, she could see that he was carrying his personal rifle, a precision weapon that she'd heard other instructors describe in almost reverent terms. It was a custom-built .308 caliber bolt-action rifle with a high-end telescopic scope and modifications that probably cost more than Sarah made in 6 months. "We're going to find out if you can back up what you said yesterday," Rodriguez explained, "about understanding equipment and knowing how to shoot." He gestured toward the distant target. 600 yards. 5 rounds. "Let's see what you can do." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. 600 yards was a serious distance, the kind of shooting that separated recreational marksmen from genuine precision shooters. At that range, a tiny error in technique or equipment could result in a complete miss. Wind, temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the earth became factors that had to be considered. "Master Chief," she began carefully, "I appreciate the opportunity, but I should mention that I've never fired this particular rifle before. Different weapons have different characteristics, and I know," Rodriguez interrupted. "That's part of the test. A real shooter should be able to adapt to unfamiliar equipment. Your dad ever teach you about that?" Sarah nodded slowly. Her father had indeed taught her that principle, usually by having her shoot different rifles at hunting camp until she could produce acceptable accuracy with whatever weapon was available. But those have been civilian hunting rifles, not a custom precision instrument worth more than a new car. Rodriguez handed her the rifle, and Sarah accepted it with appropriate reverence. The weapon was heavier than she'd expected, beautifully balanced, and obviously maintained with obsessive care. The stock fit perfectly against her shoulder, and the scope was positioned exactly where her eye naturally aligned. Someone had spent considerable time and money making this rifle as close to perfect as possible. "Ammunition," Rodriguez said, handing her a small box of match-grade cartridges. "These are hand-loaded to specific tolerances for this rifle. Velocity is 2,650 feet per second. Ballistic coefficient is .461. Wind is currently about 5 miles per hour from the left. Temperature is 58 degrees and rising. Any questions?" Sarah accepted the ammunition and began loading the rifle's 5-round magazine, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite her nervousness. "What's the target, Master Chief?" "Standard silhouette. Scoring rings are marked, but for our purposes today, anything in the 8 ring or better counts as a hit." Rodriguez settled behind the spotting scope and adjusted the focus. The 10 ring is about the size of a dinner plate at this distance. The 8 ring is about twice that. Sarah did quick mental calculations as she settled into the shooting position. At 600 yards, even a small error in aim point could result in a miss. The wind, though light, would still push the bullet several inches off course, if not properly compensated for. And she was shooting someone else's rifle, with ammunition she'd never used before, under the observation of an instructor whose opinion could determine her entire future at this command. She forced herself to slow down and focus on the fundamentals, breathing first, deep controlled breaths to oxygenate her blood and steady her nervous system. Position next, she adjusted the bipod legs until the rifle was naturally aligned with the target, then settled her body behind the weapon in a way that felt stable and comfortable. Through the scope, the target looked surprisingly clear and detailed. The high-quality optics gathered the available light and presented her with a crisp image of the black silhouette against its white background. Sarah studied the target for a moment, noting the way the mirage shimmered slightly in the warming air, indicating the direction and approximate strength of the wind. "Take your time," Rodriguez said quietly. "No pressure. Just show me what you can do." Sarah appreciated the encouragement, but they both knew there was enormous pressure. This wasn't just about hitting a target. It was about proving that she belonged here, that she was more than just a target changer who happened to have opinions about marksmanship. Her entire military future might depend on the next 5 shots. She settled the rifle's crosshairs on the target and began her final preparations. Sight picture looked good. The target appeared centered and properly aligned. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and began applying slow, steady pressure to the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the empty range. Sarah managed to follow through properly, keeping her eye on the scope and her finger on the trigger until the recoil impulse had completely finished. Through the scope, she could see a small puff of dust from the target backstop, but couldn't immediately tell where her bullet had impacted. "Good hit," Rodriguez called out after studying the target through his spotting scope. 9 rings slightly high and right. "Nice shooting." Sarah felt a surge of relief and confidence. 9 out of 10 wasn't perfect, but it was a solid hit at a difficult distance with an unfamiliar rifle. She cycled the bolt action smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge case and chambering a fresh round. The second shot felt more natural. Sarah had a better feel for the rifle's trigger now, and she'd made a small adjustment to compensate for the point of impact of her first round. This time the crosshairs settled more naturally on the target, and her trigger control felt smoother and more deliberate. The shot broke cleanly, and Sarah maintained her follow-through while Rodriguez checked the target. "Excellent," he called out. 10 ring, dead center. That's the way to do it. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she worked the bolt again. The 10 ring was the highest scoring area on the target, roughly equivalent to a bullseye in civilian shooting. Hitting it at 600 yards with an unfamiliar rifle was something to be proud of, regardless of what happened with the remaining shots. Her third shot was another 9, this time slightly low but well within the scoring rings. Her fourth was another 10, and as Sarah prepared for her fifth and final shot, she realized that something significant was happening. She wasn't just hitting the target. She was shooting well enough to impress an instructor who had trained some of the best marksmen in the military. The final shot was the most important. In her father's hunting camp philosophy, the last shot of a string often revealed the most about a shooter's true ability. It came after fatigue had set in, after the initial nervousness had been replaced by either growing confidence or mounting pressure. It was the shot that separated those who could perform when it counted from those who folded under stress. Sarah took extra time with her final preparations. She checked her position, verified her sight picture, and took several deep breaths to ensure that her heart rate and respiratory system were as steady as possible. Through the scope, the target seemed to pulse slightly with her heartbeat, a normal physiological response that experienced shooters learn to work with rather than fight. She found her natural respiratory pause, that moment between breaths when the body is naturally stable, and began her trigger press. The crosshairs held steady on the center of the target as the trigger moved slowly backward. At the precise moment when the sight picture was perfect, the rifle fired. This time Sarah could actually see the bullet impact through her scope, a small puff of paper and dust that appeared exactly in the center of the target. She maintained her position until Rodriguez confirmed what she already knew. "X-ring," he announced, using the term for a perfect center hit. Dead center, couldn't ask for better. Sarah carefully safed the rifle and sat up from the shooting position, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and exhaustion that always followed intense precision shooting. 5 shots, 5 hits, with 3 of them in the highest scoring areas of the target. It was performance that would have been respectable even for an experienced competitor with their own equipment. Rodriguez walked over from his spotting scope position, and Sarah could see something in his expression that hadn't been there before, a kind of professional respect that couldn't be faked or granted out of politeness. "That was impressive shooting," he said simply. "Really impressive. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah began the process of cleaning the rifle, running a dry patch through the barrel to remove powder residue. "My father started teaching me when I was 8 years old. He was a Marine Scout sniper in Vietnam, and he brought that precision mindset to everything he taught me about shooting." This was the first time Sarah had mentioned her father's military background, and she could see Rodriguez processing this new information. A Scout sniper heritage would explain a lot about her natural understanding of precision marksmanship and equipment. "He taught you well," Rodriguez said. "That was some of the best cold-bore shooting I've seen from someone who's never fired that rifle before. The way you adapted to the equipment and maintained consistency across all 5 shots, that takes real skill." Sarah felt a warm glow of pride at the compliment, but she tried to keep her response humble. "Thank you, Master Chief. I've had good instruction and lots of practice." Rodriguez took the cleaned rifle and began securing it in its case. "Chun, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Are you happy in your current assignment?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She paused in the middle of packing her gear and looked up at Rodriguez's serious expression. "Master Chief, range operations is important work," Rodriguez continued, but it's not the only work that needs to be done around here. We've got programs that require people with advanced marksmanship skills, people who understand precision shooting at the highest level, people who can not only perform under pressure, but who can teach others to perform under pressure. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she began to understand where this conversation was heading. What kind of programs? The kind where yesterday's performance with Lieutenant Morrison would be seen as a strength rather than overstepping your bounds, Rodriguez said. The kind where your ability to spot equipment problems and suggest solutions will be valued rather than dismissed. He checked his watch and shouldered his rifle case. I'm going to make some phone calls and review some paperwork. Don't mention this conversation to anyone else yet, but be prepared for some changes in your assignment. Good changes. As Rodriguez walked away, Sarah stood alone on an empty range, watching the sun climb higher over the California desert. The morning had started with uncertainty and anxiety, but it was ending with possibilities she hadn't dared to hope for. For the first time since arriving at Coronado, she felt like she might actually have a future here that involved more than changing targets and cleaning equipment. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. If Rodriguez was thinking about moving her into a more advanced position, there would be other tests, other challenges, and other opportunities to either prove herself or fail spectacularly. The 5 shots she just fired had opened a door, but walking through that door would require everything her father had taught her about precision, patience, and perseverance. Sarah finished packing her gear and began to walk back to the main base, already planning how she would spend the rest of her day. There were still targets to change, equipment to maintain, and ammunition to inventory. Her regular duties hadn't changed, and she was determined to continue performing them flawlessly while she waited to see what opportunities might develop. Behind her, the 600-yard targets stood silently in the growing heat, marked by 5 precise holes that represented far more than just accurate shooting. They represented the moment when everything changed, when a target changer became something more, when potential finally had a chance to become reality. The real question now was whether Sarah would be ready for whatever came next. 3 days passed without any mention of the early morning shooting session. Sarah continued her regular duties, changing targets and maintaining equipment while trying not to read too much into Rodriguez's meaningful glances or the way he seemed to be studying her work more carefully than before. She began to wonder if she'd imagined the significance of their conversation, or if Rodriguez had reconsidered whatever he'd been thinking about. On Friday afternoon, while she was inventorying ammunition in the supply room, Chief Harrison appeared in the doorway with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Chun, I need to see you in my office," he said without preamble. Sarah felt her stomach drop. In her experience, unexpected summons to supervisors' offices rarely brought good news. She followed Harrison through the administrative area, past the desks where other range personnel handled scheduling and paperwork, to the small office where Harrison managed the day-to-day operations of the entire facility. "Sit down," Harrison said, settling behind his desk and opening a manila folder. "I've been having some interesting conversations about you lately." Sarah sat carefully in the offered chair, trying to read Harrison's expression and failing completely. "Sir, Master Chief Rodriguez seems to think you have some talents that we're not making full use of," Harrison continued. "He's recommended you for additional training and possible reassignment to the Advanced Marksmanship Program." The Advanced Marksmanship Program. Sarah had heard whispers about it, an elite training course that took the best shooters from across the Navy and turned them into instructors and specialists. Graduates of the program went on to teach at advanced schools, serve as advisors to special operations units, and compete on military shooting teams. It was exactly the kind of opportunity she dreamed about, but never dared to hope for. However, Harrison continued, there are some complications. The program has very specific requirements, and there's considerable competition for slots. You'd be competing against experienced marksmen from across the fleet, people with years of advanced training and combat experience. Sarah nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral despite the excitement building in her chest. "I understand, Chief. There's also the question of timing," Harrison explained. "The next class starts in 6 weeks, which means you need to complete your evaluation and selection process quickly. And that evaluation process includes some challenges that go well beyond what you demonstrated to Rodriguez the other morning. Harrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah's face. I'm going to be honest with you, Chun. Rodriguez believes in your potential, but he's the only instructor who's seen you shoot. The rest of the staff knows you as the target changer who had words with Lieutenant Morrison. If you want this opportunity, you're going to have to prove yourself to people who have no reason to believe you belong in an advanced program. What would that involve? Sarah asked. A formal evaluation conducted in front of the senior instructor staff, Harrison replied. Multiple shooting positions, various distances, different weather conditions. You'd also need to demonstrate your ability to teach marksmanship fundamentals to other personnel. And you need to do all of this while maintaining your current duties and not falling behind in any of your regular responsibilities. The magnitude of the challenge was daunting, but Sarah felt her determination crystallizing rather than wavering. This was exactly the kind of opportunity her father had always told her to prepare for. The moment when preparation met possibility, when years of practice and dedication could finally pay off. "I'd like to try, Chief," she said firmly. Harrison smiled for the first time since the conversation had started. "I was hoping you'd say that. Rodriguez has volunteered to work with you during your off-duty hours to help you prepare. But, Chun, this isn't just about shooting. If you wash out of this evaluation, it's going to follow you for the rest of your career. People will remember that you tried and failed. Are you sure you're ready for that risk?" Sarah thought about her father's words about taking shots you were confident you could make, but she also remembered his other lesson, that sometimes you had to bet everything on yourself if you wanted to achieve something truly important. "I'm ready, Chief." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of exhausting preparation. Rodriguez met with Sarah every morning before regular duty hours and every evening after her shift ended. They worked on advanced shooting positions, moving targets, rapid-fire accuracy, and precision shooting under various environmental conditions. Rodriguez pushed her harder than any instructor had ever pushed her, demanding excellence in every aspect of marksmanship fundamentals. "The evaluation isn't just about hitting targets," Rodriguez explained during one particularly grueling evening session. "They're going to be watching how you handle pressure, how you adapt to changing conditions, and how you maintain your composure when things don't go according to plan. These instructors have seen plenty of people who can shoot well when everything is perfect. What they're looking for is someone who can perform when everything goes wrong." Sarah learned to shoot accurately while lying on her side, while kneeling behind barricades, and while supporting herself in awkward positions that made maintaining a stable sight picture nearly impossible. She practiced transitioning rapidly between targets at different distances, making the mental calculations necessary to adjust her point of aim for varying ranges and wind conditions. More challenging was the teaching component. Rodriguez had her explain marksmanship fundamentals to other range personnel, critiquing her ability to communicate complex technical concepts in terms that beginners could understand. Sarah discovered that knowing how to do something and knowing how to teach someone else to do it were entirely different skills. "Teaching marksmanship is like teaching someone to think," Rodriguez explained after a particularly frustrating practice session. "You're not just showing them how to pull a trigger, you're teaching them how to analyze conditions, make decisions under pressure, and maintain discipline when their adrenaline is pumping. The best instructors don't just demonstrate technique. They help people understand the thinking behind the technique." Meanwhile, Sarah's regular duties continued without interruption. She still changed targets, cleaned weapons, and managed ammunition inventory, but now she did these tasks with the knowledge that every action was being observed and evaluated. Word of her upcoming evaluation had spread throughout the range staff, creating an undercurrent of curiosity and speculation that followed her everywhere. Lieutenant Morrison had been notably absent since learning about Sarah's opportunity, but his influence lingered in the form of skeptical comments and barely concealed doubts expressed by some of the other trainees. Sarah heard whispered conversations about diversity initiatives and lowered standards that made it clear that some people viewed her evaluation as a political gesture rather than a genuine assessment of ability. 2 days before the evaluation, Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside after an evening training session. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Nervous," Sarah admitted. "But ready?" Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Good. Nervous means you understand what's at stake. Ready means you've done the work necessary to succeed. He paused, studying her face in the fading light. Chun, I want you to understand something. This evaluation is going to be harder than anything you've experienced so far. The instructors conducting it are going to push you to your limits and beyond because that's the only way to determine if you have what it takes for advanced training. I understand, Master Chief, but I also want you to remember why we're doing this, Rodriguez continued. It's not about proving anything to Morrison or anyone else who doubts you. It's not about making some kind of statement about female marksmanship or breaking barriers. It's about determining whether you have the skills and temperament to serve in a capacity where lives might depend on your ability to hit targets under the worst possible conditions. Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. She'd always known that precision shooting was about more than scores on targets, but she'd never really considered the ultimate purpose behind the training. Somewhere out there, special operations personnel might depend on the skills taught by advanced marksmanship program graduates. Her performance over the next 2 days could ultimately affect the safety and success of people she would never meet. The night before the evaluation, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling and running through everything she'd learned over the past 6 weeks. Breathing techniques, sight picture, trigger control, position stability, wind reading, range estimation, target analysis. The fundamentals that her father had taught her as a child, refined and expanded through intensive preparation with one of the Navy's best instructors. But beyond the technical aspects, she thought about the mental game that separated good shooters from great ones. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to analyze problems objectively, and to maintain confidence even when things went wrong. These were qualities that couldn't be taught in the traditional sense. They had to be developed through experience and reinforced through repetition under stress. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her father. Heard about your big day tomorrow. Remember what I taught you about breathing and follow through. But mostly remember that you belong there, and you've earned your chance to prove it. Proud of you regardless of what happens. Reading her father's message, Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Whatever happened tomorrow, she'd given everything she had to the preparation. She'd worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life, learned more in 6 weeks than she'd learned in the previous 6 months, and proven to herself that she could rise to meet extraordinary challenges. The evaluation would either open doors to opportunities she'd never imagined, or it would close them definitively. But either way, she'd know that she'd taken her best shot. Sarah set her alarm for 0500 and tried to get some sleep, though her mind continued racing through sight pictures and wind calculations until well past midnight. Tomorrow would determine whether 6 weeks of brutal preparation had been enough to transform a target changer into something more. Tomorrow would determine whether she truly belonged among the Navy's elite marksmen, or whether she'd been fooling herself all along. In the darkness of her quarters, with the sound of waves crashing against the Coronado shore in the distance, Sarah Chun prepared to take the most important shots of her life. Everything she'd worked for, everything she dreamed about, and everything her father had taught her about precision and perseverance would be tested in front of instructors who had no reason to believe she could succeed. But she'd proven herself before in her father's hunting camps and on civilian shooting ranges. Tomorrow, she'd find out if those skills translated to the highest levels of military marksmanship training. Tomorrow, the target changer would discover whether she had what it took to become something more. Sarah arrived at the range complex at 0545, 15 minutes early, and, carrying the gear she'd carefully prepared the night before. The California morning was crisp and clear, with barely a breath of wind and unlimited visibility across the desert ranges. If she'd been able to order perfect shooting conditions, this would have been exactly what she'd requested. The evaluation panel was already assembled when she reached the main firing line. 4 senior instructors sat behind a table equipped with spotting scopes, rangefinders, and evaluation forms. Sarah recognized 2 of them from their reputations around the base, but the other 2 were unfamiliar faces who'd apparently been brought in specifically for this assessment. Rodriguez stood to one side, officially present as an observer, but clearly invested in the outcome. Master Chief Patricia Walsh, the senior marksmanship instructor for the entire base, served as the head evaluator. She was a compact, intense woman in her late 40s who'd earned her position through 2 decades of competitive shooting and advanced instruction. Sarah had seen her around the base, but had never spoken with her directly. Petty Officer Chun, Walsh called out as Sarah approached. "Good morning. Are you ready to proceed?" "Yes, Master Chief," Sarah replied, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "Excellent. Let me explain what we'll be doing today," Walsh continued, consulting the papers on the table in front of her. "This evaluation consists of 4 components. First, precision shooting at known distances from supported positions. Second, rapid engagement of multiple targets from field expedient positions. Third, unknown distance shooting with range estimation. Fourth, instructional demonstration with live students." Sarah nodded, mentally reviewing the techniques Rodriguez had drilled into her for each of these challenges. "Each component is graded independently," Walsh explained, "but you must achieve a passing score on all 4 to be considered for the advanced marksmanship program." "Questions?" "No, Master Chief." "Very well. Let's begin with precision shooting. You'll fire 5 rounds each at 300, 500, and 700-yard targets using the provided rifle and ammunition. You have 30 minutes to complete all 15 shots." One of the other instructors handed Sarah a rifle similar to Rodriguez's personal weapon, a precision bolt-action chambered in .308 with a high-end scope and custom stock. The ammunition was military match grade, loaded to exact specifications for consistency and accuracy. Sarah accepted the weapon and began her inspection, checking the scope settings and familiarizing herself with the trigger characteristics. The 300-yard stage went smoothly. Sarah's first shot was a 9-ring hit, slightly high, but well within the scoring area. Her subsequent 4 shots tightened into a group that covered less than 3 inches, with 3 10s and 2 9s. It was solid performance, the kind of shooting that demonstrated competence without being spectacular. Moving to the 500-yard line required significant adjustments to the scope settings and a more careful reading of the minimal wind conditions. At this distance, small errors in technique or judgment became magnified, and the margin for error decreased dramatically. Sarah took extra time with her first shot, ensuring that her position was perfectly stable and her sight picture was exactly where she wanted it. The bullet impacted in the X-ring, dead center of the target. Her confidence grew as she worked through the remaining 4 shots, each one hitting in a 9-ring or better. The 5-shot group measured just over 4 inches, which translated to less than 1 minute of angle. Precision shooting by any reasonable standard. The 700-yard stage represented the most challenging distance shooting Sarah had ever attempted in a formal evaluation. At that range, the target appeared small even through the high-powered scope, and environmental factors that were negligible at shorter distances became critical variables. Sarah spent several minutes studying the conditions, watching heat mirage through the scope, and noting the way grass moved in the slight breeze that had developed as the morning progressed. Her first shot at 700 yards was a clean hit in the 9-ring, but slightly left of center. Sarah made a minor windage adjustment and fired her second round, which impacted closer to the center of the target. The remaining 3 shots formed a tight group in the center of the scoring area, with her final shot earning another X-ring hit. "Excellent shooting," Walsh commented as Sarah cleared the rifle and stepped back from the firing line. Moving on to Component 2, rapid engagement of multiple targets. The second phase took place on a different range, set up with 5 silhouette targets placed at varying distances between 200 and 400 yards. Sarah would have 2 minutes to engage each target with 2 rounds, transitioning between positions and ranges as quickly as possible while maintaining accuracy standards. This was a completely different kind of challenge. Instead of taking unlimited time to perfect each shot, Sarah would need to move rapidly between targets, make quick range and wind estimations, and fire accurately under time pressure. It was the kind of shooting that tested not just marksmanship fundamentals, but the ability to perform under stress. Rodriguez had prepared her well for this phase. They'd practiced rapid target engagement until Sarah could transition smoothly between different ranges and positions making the mental calculations necessary for accurate shooting even while moving. The key was maintaining proper fundamentals while working quickly. Rushing the shots would only lead to missed targets and lower scores. Sarah's first target was at 200 yards, an easy range that allowed her to establish rhythm and confidence. Both shots hit the center scoring area cleanly. She transitioned to the 350-yard target, making quick scope adjustments while moving to a different firing position. The longer shot required more careful aim, but both rounds found their mark in the scoring rings. The pattern continued through all 5 targets. Sarah's movements were efficient and deliberate, never hurried, but never hesitant. Her shots were accurate without being perfect. She wasn't trying to achieve extreme precision on every round, just consistent hits in the scoring areas that would meet the evaluation standards. Time. Walsh called out as Sarah fired her final round. All targets engaged within the time limit. Good work. The third component, unknown distance shooting, was perhaps the most demanding test of field marksmanship skills. Sarah would be presented with targets at unmarked ranges and would need to estimate the distance, adjust her scope accordingly, and achieve first-round hits. It was the kind of shooting that might be required in real-world situations where laser rangefinders weren't available and quick, accurate engagement was critical. The first target was obviously close, probably around 250 yards based on its apparent size through the scope. Sarah made her calculations, adjusted her scope, and fired a shot that hit slightly low but within the scoring area. The second target appeared to be at moderate range. She estimated 380 yards and adjusted accordingly. This shot was closer to center, indicating that her range estimation had been more accurate. The final unknown distance target was the most challenging. It appeared small through the scope, suggesting significant distance, but determining exactly how far required careful analysis of the target's apparent size relative to known reference points. Sarah estimated 520 yards, made her scope adjustments, and took extra time to ensure her fundamentals were perfect before firing. The shot was a clean hit in the 9 ring, confirming that her range estimation and ballistic calculations had been essentially correct. Unknown distance shooting was often considered one of the most advanced marksmanship skills, and Sarah had demonstrated competence that impressed even the evaluating instructors. Outstanding, one of the evaluators commented. That was some of the best unknown distance work we've seen from a candidate. The final component, instructional demonstration, took place in a classroom setting with 3 volunteer students who'd been selected to receive marksmanship instruction. Sarah would need to teach basic precision shooting fundamentals, demonstrate proper technique, and then supervise the students as they applied what they'd learned on the firing line. This was the component Sarah had worried about most. She was confident in her own shooting ability, but teaching others required a completely different set of skills. She needed to communicate complex concepts clearly, diagnose problems in real time, and maintain control of the learning environment while ensuring safety. Sarah began her instruction with a brief explanation of marksmanship fundamentals, position, breathing, sight picture, trigger control, and follow-through. She demonstrated each element clearly, showing the students how proper technique looked and explaining why each component was important for accurate shooting. The most important thing to remember, Sarah explained, is that precision shooting is about consistency. If you can perform the fundamentals exactly the same way every time, your shots will hit the same place every time. The goal isn't to be perfect on your first shot. It's to be consistent, so you can predict where each shot will hit. When the students moved to the firing line for practical application, Sarah positioned herself where she could observe all 3 simultaneously. She watched their positions, listened to their breathing patterns, and observed their trigger technique, offering corrections and encouragement as needed. Relax your grip slightly, she told one student whose shots were consistently pulling to the left. You're muscling the rifle instead of letting it settle naturally. Think of holding it like you'd hold a small bird, firm enough that it won't fly away, but gentle enough that you won't hurt it. The analogy seemed to work. The student's subsequent shots moved closer to the center of the target, and his grouping tightened noticeably. Another student was having trouble with breathing technique, holding her breath too long and causing muscle tremors that affected her accuracy. Sarah demonstrated the proper respiratory pause method, showing how to fire during the natural pause between breaths when the body was most stable. By the end of the instructional session, all 3 students had shown marked improvement in their shooting performance. More importantly, from the evaluator's perspective, Sarah had demonstrated the ability to diagnose problems, communicate solutions effectively, and maintain a positive learning environment even when students struggled with new concepts. That concludes the evaluation, Walsh announced as the students left the firing line. Petty Officer Chun, please wait in the ready room while we review your performance and make our determination. Sarah spent the next 30 minutes in the small waiting area adjacent to the range office, trying not to obsess over every shot she'd taken and every word she'd spoken during the instructional phase. She'd done her best under challenging conditions, and now the decision was out of her hands. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Chun, the evaluation panel is ready for you. Sarah walked back to the range where the 4 instructors were waiting behind their table. Walsh held a completed evaluation form, but her expression gave no indication of its contents. Petty Officer Chun, Walsh began formally. The evaluation panel has completed its assessment of your performance across all 4 components of today's testing. Sarah stood at attention, her heart pounding as she waited for the verdict that would determine the course of her military career. In the precision shooting component, you achieved scores of 47 out of 50 at 300 yards, 46 out of 50 at 500 yards, and 44 out of 50 at 700 yards, Walsh continued. Your overall precision score of 137 out of 150 exceeds the minimum requirement of 120. Sarah felt a surge of relief, but Walsh wasn't finished. In rapid target engagement, you successfully engaged all 5 targets within the time limit with 9 out of 10 hits in the scoring areas, which exceeds the minimum requirement of 7 out of 10. 2 components passed. Sarah tried to keep her expression neutral while her pulse raced. In unknown distance shooting, you achieved first-round hits on all 3 targets, which meets the requirement of 2 out of 3 hits. 3 for 3. Only the instructional component remained. In your teaching demonstration, you effectively communicated marksmanship fundamentals, successfully diagnosed and corrected student problems, and maintained appropriate safety standards throughout the instruction period. The evaluation panel was particularly impressed with your ability to explain complex concepts in terms that beginning shooters could understand and apply immediately. Walsh paused, making eye contact with Sarah before delivering the final verdict. Based on your performance across all evaluation components, the panel unanimously recommends your acceptance into the Advanced Marksmanship Program. Congratulations, Petty Officer Chun. You've earned this opportunity. Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief and joy. 6 weeks of intensive preparation, years of foundation training with her father, and a lifetime of dreaming about opportunities like this had finally paid off. She was going to be more than a target changer. She was going to be an advanced marksmanship instructor. Thank you, Master Chief, she managed to say. I won't let you down. I don't believe you will, Walsh replied. Your performance today demonstrated not just shooting ability, but the kind of dedication and professionalism we need in our advanced instructors. Report to the program coordinator Monday morning at 0800. You've got a lot of work ahead of you, but based on what we've seen today, you're ready for it. As Sarah walked away from the range, she felt Rodriguez fall in his step beside her. How does it feel, he asked. Unreal, Sarah replied honestly. 6 months ago, I was just changing targets and cleaning equipment. Now I'm going to be training advanced marksmen. You were never just changing targets, Rodriguez said. You were always a shooter who happened to be assigned to support duties. Today just made it official. Sarah looked back at the range complex, where she'd spent the last 6 months learning what it meant to be part of something bigger than herself. Tomorrow, her real education would begin. But today she'd proven that sometimes the most important shot is the one that opens doors to everything that comes after. The target changer had become something more, and this was only the beginning. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the head of her first advanced marksmanship class, looking out at 12 experienced military marksmen who had come from across the fleet to learn advanced precision shooting techniques. Among the students sat Lieutenant Morrison, who had specifically requested assignment to the course after learning that the former target changer was now an instructor. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The man who had dismissed her as someone who should stick to what she knows was now sitting in her classroom, notebook open and ready to learn from her expertise. But she felt no satisfaction in the reversal of roles, only a professional responsibility to help him and every other student achieve their maximum potential. The advanced marksmanship program had been everything Rodriguez had promised and more. 8 weeks of intensive training that pushed Sarah beyond anything she'd previously experienced, covering not just shooting techniques, but ballistics, meteorology, equipment maintenance, and advanced instructional methods. She'd learned to make shots at distances she'd never imagined possible, under conditions that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. More importantly, she'd learned that being an advanced marksman wasn't just about personal achievement. It was about developing skills and knowledge that could save lives in combat situations, and then passing that knowledge on to others who might need it in the most critical moments imaginable. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from hard-earned expertise. "Welcome to Advanced Precision Marksmanship. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to push your shooting abilities beyond what you thought was possible. But first, let's talk about why we're here." Sarah clicked to her first slide, which showed a photograph of a special operations team preparing for deployment. Precision marksmanship isn't about winning competitions or setting records at shooting matches. It's about providing accurate, effective fire support when lives are on the line. Everything we do in this course is designed with that ultimate purpose in mind. She could see Morrison shifting uncomfortably in his seat, perhaps remembering their confrontation on the range months earlier. But Sarah had moved far beyond that moment. Her focus now was on ensuring that every student, regardless of their background or attitude, left the course with skills that could make them more effective in their assigned duties. The first week of the course covered fundamental precision shooting techniques at known distances. Sarah worked with each student individually, analyzing their shooting positions and techniques with the same attention to detail that Rodriguez had shown her during her preparation for evaluation. She found that her ability to spot problems and suggest corrections had improved dramatically through her own advanced training. "Morrison, you're consistently shooting low and left," Sarah observed during one range session, using the same words she'd offered months earlier, but in a completely different context. "Your fundamentals are solid, but I think your scope needs adjustment. Let's take a look." Morrison accepted the correction without comment, allowing Sarah to examine his rifle and make the necessary adjustments. When his subsequent shots began hitting the center of the target, he nodded acknowledgement of her expertise without any of the condescension he'd shown before. The second week moved into unknown distance shooting and field conditions. Sarah taught the students how to estimate range using various techniques, how to read wind and mirage effects, and how to make rapid ballistic calculations in their heads. These were skills that could mean the difference between mission success and failure in real-world situations. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah had the students engage targets from improvised positions while wearing full combat gear and carrying heavy packs. The point was to simulate the physical stress and equipment constraints they might encounter in actual operations. "Remember," Sarah called out as the students struggled to maintain accuracy while fighting fatigue and awkward positioning, "in the real world, you don't get to choose your shooting position or your environmental conditions. You have to make precision shots from wherever you are, with whatever equipment you have, under whatever stress the situation presents." One student, a young Marine corporal named Jenkins, was having particular difficulty. His shots were scattered across the target, and his frustration was becoming obvious. Sarah approached him quietly, offering the same kind of patient instruction she'd received from Rodriguez during her darkest moments of preparation. "Take a breath, Corporal," Sarah said calmly. "What's the most important thing about precision shooting?" "Accuracy," Jenkins replied uncertainly. "Consistency," Sarah corrected. "Right now, you try to make each shot perfect instead of making each shot the same. Focus on performing your fundamentals exactly the same way every time. The accuracy will come naturally if you can achieve consistency." Jenkins nodded and settled back into his shooting position. Sarah watched as he took several deep breaths, adjusted his position slightly, and fired his next shot. This one hit much closer to the center of the target. "Better," Sarah said. "Now do exactly the same thing again." The third week introduced advanced shooting positions and moving targets. Sarah taught the students how to engage targets while shooting from vehicles, from elevated positions, and from behind various types of cover. These were specialized skills that most marksmen would never need, but which could be critical in certain operational scenarios. Morrison proved to be an excellent student once his attitude adjusted. His natural shooting ability, combined with genuine effort to learn, made him one of the top performers in the class. During one exercise involving precision shooting from a moving platform, he achieved a level of accuracy that impressed even Sarah. "Outstanding work," she told him after he'd successfully engaged a series of targets while shooting from the back of a moving truck. "You've really embraced the advanced techniques." Morrison nodded his appreciation for the compliment, then hesitated before speaking. "Instructor Chun, I owe you an apology. What I said to you on the range months ago was unprofessional and wrong. You've proven yourself to be one of the most knowledgeable marksmanship instructors I've ever trained with." Sarah appreciated the apology, but she moved beyond needing validation from Morrison or anyone else who had initially doubted her abilities. "Thank you, Lieutenant. What matters now is that you take these skills back to your unit and use them to make yourself and your teammates more effective." The fourth and final week culminated in a comprehensive practical exercise that tested everything the students had learned. They would need to demonstrate precision shooting at various distances, unknown distance engagement, shooting from field expedient positions, and the ability to teach marksmanship techniques to others. Sarah watched from the observation tower as her students worked through the challenges she designed for them. Each exercise was based on real-world scenarios that had been developed by combat veterans and advanced marksmanship experts. The students were being tested not just on their shooting ability, but on their ability to apply precision marksmanship skills under stress. Jenkins, the young Marine who had struggled initially, was now performing at a level that would have been unimaginable during the first week. His shots were consistent and accurate, and his confidence had grown tremendously. Watching his transformation reminded Sarah of her own journey from target changer to instructor. Morrison was performing exactly as Sarah had expected, with technical precision and obvious competence. But more importantly, she'd observe him helping struggling classmates during breaks and offering encouragement to students who were having difficulty. He'd become the kind of positive leader that advanced training programs were designed to develop. At the graduation ceremony, Sarah presented certificates to all 12 students, each of whom had successfully completed one of the most demanding marksmanship courses in the military. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction in their achievement, knowing that each of them was returning to their units with skills that could make a real difference in operational effectiveness. Master Chief Walsh attended the ceremony and spoke to the graduating students about their responsibilities as advanced marksmen. "You are now part of a select community," she told them. "You have knowledge and abilities that most military personnel will never possess. With that knowledge comes the responsibility to share it, to teach others, and to maintain the highest standards of professionalism and competence." After the ceremony, Sarah found herself alone on the range where Rodriguez had first tested her abilities. The California sun was setting over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young woman with a dream of military service to an instructor responsible for training some of the finest marksmen in the military. Rodriguez approached from the direction of the main complex, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the base exchange. "Reflecting on your first class?" he asked, offering her one of the cups. "Thinking about how much has changed," Sarah replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "6 months ago, I was changing targets and wondering if I'd ever get a chance to prove myself. Now I'm responsible for training advanced marksmen who go back to units all over the world." "That's the nature of opportunity," Rodriguez said. "It usually shows up when you've prepared for it, but aren't expecting it. The question is what you do when it arrives." Sarah sipped her coffee and watched the last light fade from the western sky. "What's next for me? I know there are other programs, other opportunities for advancement." "That depends on what you want to accomplish," Rodriguez replied. "You could pursue instructor assignments at advanced schools, compete on military shooting teams, or apply for special operations support positions. The advanced marksmanship program opens a lot of doors." Sarah had been thinking about exactly that question for weeks. The program had given her technical skills and knowledge that she'd never imagined possessing, but it had also given her something more important, a clear sense of purpose. She knew now that her most important contribution wasn't just her ability to hit targets, but her ability to help others develop their own potential. "I want to stay here," she said finally. "I want to continue developing as an instructor and help build the next generation of advanced marksmen." There's something satisfying about taking people who think they've reached their limits and showing them they're capable of more than they imagined. Rodriguez smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Walsh has been talking about expanding the instructor staff, and your performance with this first class has been impressive." Morrison specifically requested to include a letter of recommendation in his file about your instruction. 3 months later, Sarah received notification of her promotion to Petty Officer First Class, along with assignment as a permanent instructor in the Advanced Marksmanship program. The promotion came with increased responsibility, including development of new training curricula and evaluation of other potential instructor candidates. On the morning she received her promotion warrant, Sarah walked out to the 600-yard range where Rodriguez had first tested her abilities. The targets stood silently in the distance, waiting for the day's training to begin. Soon, a new group of students would arrive, each carrying their own dreams and doubts about what they might be able to accomplish. Sarah thought about the young woman who had arrived at Coronado 8 months earlier, clutching transfer orders and hoping for a chance to prove herself. That woman had been talented and determined, but she'd had no idea what she was truly capable of achieving. It had taken courage to accept Rodriguez's challenge, dedication to complete the intensive preparation, and faith in herself to perform under the pressure of formal evaluation. But the most important moment hadn't been any of those milestones. It had been the decision to speak up about Morrison's scope adjustment, to risk embarrassment and ridicule for the chance to be helpful. That moment of courage had led to everything that followed. The early morning test, the intensive preparation, the formal evaluation, and ultimately the opportunity to become something she'd never dared to dream about. Now, as an instructor responsible for developing other advanced marksmen, Sarah understood that her true mission was to help others find their own moments of courage, to recognize potential in unexpected places, and provide opportunities for people to exceed their own expectations. The California sun climbed higher over the desert ranges, and Sarah could hear vehicles arriving in the parking area as her next class of students prepared for their first day of training. Among them would be talented marksmen who doubted their abilities, overlooked individuals with hidden potential, and probably at least one person who would remind her of herself 8 months ago. She had work to do. Sarah Chun walked back toward the main complex, ready to begin another day of turning potential into performance, doubt into confidence, and ordinary military personnel into exceptional marksmen. Behind her, the targets stood ready, waiting for the next group of students who would discover that they were capable of far more than they'd ever imagined. Sometimes the most important shot is the one that opens doors. Sometimes the real target is the person looking through the scope, discovering what they're truly capable of achieving. And sometimes being simply trusted with a rifle changes everything.